There's a certain kind of silence that only exists in old houses, a silence that feels like it's waiting, the kind that presses against your chest, whispering that something, or someone, remembers more than it should. The house on Willow Creek had been abandoned for nearly 30 years before anyone dared to open its doors again. Locals said it was cursed, that families who moved in never lasted more than a year. But no one could ever agree on why. Some said it was mold, some said bad luck, and others, quietly, swore they'd seen faces in the upstairs window long after the last light went out. When the county finally sent a man to inspect the property, a young appraiser named David Sloan, he wasn't expecting much. Just another rotting piece of history to catalogue before it was bulldozed and forgotten. But inside that house, David found something no one was prepared to see. Every wall had been stripped bare, every photograph removed, yet on one wall, the only one still painted, there was writing, faint and almost erased by time. One sentence, scrawled in what looked like charcoal, one house, one lie, too many secrets. At first he thought it was nothing, just vandalism, maybe a prank, but then he noticed something else, the nails still embedded in the wall, arranged in the shape of frames that were no longer there. And faint outlines beneath them, faces that had been hung then torn away. David called his supervisor, who told him to take photos for documentation, but when he lifted his camera, the battery died. He switched to his phone. Same thing. Dead. That's when he noticed the floorboards beneath his feet, uneven, warped, and a pattern in the dust, as if someone had been pacing again and again in the same exact spot for years. He almost left then, he should have, but curiosity has a way of digging graves for men who don't know when to stop. So he stayed, and he kept searching. And what he found beneath that house, beneath its silence, beneath its floor, would unravel an entire family's lie. A lie that began with one photograph, and ended with a burial no one ever reported. David came back the next morning with tools, a flashlight, gloves, a pry bar. The air inside the house was colder than it should have been. His breath fogged as he stepped across the warped floorboards, each creak sounding more deliberate than the last, as if the house was reacting to his intrusion. He started with the pacing spot, the patch of floor where the boards bowed slightly inward. It took 3 careful swings before one plank lifted free. The smell that escaped was old, dry, and wrong. Not rot exactly, but something that had once been alive. Beneath the floor was a small wooden box, perfectly centered between the beams. It wasn't buried deep, just hidden enough to stay untouched. The latch was rusted shut. David forced it open with the edge of his crowbar. Inside, there were photographs, black and white, edges curled, faces smiling stiffly against the light, but they weren't strangers. They were all taken inside this very house. Same wallpaper, same furniture, the same framed mirror that now hung empty in the hallway. There were 12 photographs in total. 11 of them showed the same family, a man, a woman, and 3 children, over the span of years. Their clothes changed, their faces aged, but one thing stayed constant. They never looked happy. The 12th photograph was different. It showed only the man standing in front of the house, holding a shovel. The date on the back read, June 17th, 1963. David turned it over again, staring at the man's expression. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't posing. He was looking at whoever took the photo, eyes wide, desperate, almost pleading, like he knew this would be the last picture ever taken of him. That night, David couldn't sleep. He went back online trying to find any record of the family who had lived there, but there were none. No census data, no obituaries, no property transfers after 1964. It was as if they had simply vanished. He called the local archives the next morning. The clerk on the phone hesitated when he mentioned the address. Then she said something that made the back of his neck go cold. That house was never supposed to be there, she told him. It wasn't listed on any county maps until 1961, and even then, it wasn't built by the family who lived in it. It was built by the man who buried them. David drove back to Willow Creek that evening long after sunset. The roads were empty, the air thick with the smell of rain. He parked beneath a leaning oak and just stared at the house through his windshield. Its silhouette looked smaller somehow, like it was shrinking back into the earth that had grown tired of holding it up. He didn't bring a flashlight this time, only the box of photographs and a name. The clerk had given it to him before she hung up. Elias Monroe, builder, landowner, and, according to the town's oldest property record, the only man ever documented as living on that plot. But Elias had no family, no wife, no children, no relatives in any census record, yet here were photographs showing a wife, 3 children, and decades of life under one roof. David couldn't reconcile it. Unless they weren't his family. Inside, the house had changed. The dust prints from his boots were gone. The pacing mark in the floor seemed wider, and from somewhere deep in the hallway, he could hear a faint ticking, like an old pocket watch muffled by walls. He followed it, past the bare living room, past the staircase whose steps moaned with age, to a narrow door he hadn't noticed before, one that blended into the wall so perfectly it could have been painted over years ago. The door led down, a cellar, cramped and cold. The ticking grew louder. In the beam of his phone light, David saw shelves lined with jars, hundreds of them, each labeled in faint, faded handwriting. Spring 1958, Winter 1959, Fall 1960. Inside the jars were bits of cloth, locks of hair, and small objects. A toy soldier, a hair ribbon, a child's marble. He nearly dropped the light when he saw what was hanging from the ceiling. 12 empty frames, swinging gently as though disturbed moments before he arrived. At the center of the cellar, a wooden chair sat facing the wall, and nailed into that wall, in handwriting identical to the message upstairs, were 3 words: "Remember their names." David's hands trembled as he went back through the photographs. He looked closer this time. The children, their smiles had changed between photos, first natural, then stiff, then gone. Their eyes, once bright, seemed clouded in the later pictures. And the mother, she was gone entirely in the last one, just the father and the kids, standing in front of that same cellar door, and behind the window, half hidden in shadow, a 4th child, one who was never named. The 4th child shouldn't have existed. There was no mention of another birth, no record, no face ever described in the county's archives, but David could see her, faintly, in the reflection of the glass, her eyes too wide, her face pale and thin, staring through the window like she'd been left behind. He enlarged the photograph on his laptop, adjusting the contrast, the brightness, and what he saw was impossible. The girl wasn't outside looking in. She was inside, looking out. The window frame's shadow fell behind her, not in front. She was inside the house when the photo was taken, but not with the rest of them. That night, David found the full property deed in the archive logs. It listed only 2 names, Elias Monroe, and beneath it, written faintly in red ink, Adoptive Ward, name withheld by request. The record had been amended in 1962. A year before the last photograph. The deeper David searched, the stranger it became. Neighbors from the 1960s had described hearing children crying at night, sometimes seeing a little girl walking along the edge of the property line barefoot in winter, but when they'd knock, Elias would answer the door alone, smiling thinly, saying, "You must have heard the radio." He said it every time, even when the house didn't have electricity. One neighbor, a woman named Clara Haynes, left a handwritten statement with the local sheriff before she died. It read, "There was something wrong with that family. The children never grew older, not in the pictures, not in person, and that little one. She wasn't supposed to be there." David couldn't stop thinking about the girl in the photo. He scanned the other images again, focusing on mirrors, reflections, window glass. And there she was, faintly, in nearly all of them. Never in the same place twice. In one, her hand rested on the oldest boy's shoulder. In another, she stood behind the mother's chair, always watching. David returned to the house one final time just before dawn. The cellar door was still open, the chair was still there, but now, the photographs he'd left upstairs, they were gone. In their place, on the wall where he'd first seen the words, someone had written again. Only this time, the handwriting was shaky, uneven, fresh. "Stop digging." He backed away, heart hammering, and that's when he saw it. A figure in the corner of the hallway mirror, standing just over his shoulder, a small, pale girl, smiling faintly through the glass. And her lips were moving. David ran, out the door, into the morning fog that seemed to swallow the world whole. But when he looked back, the house wasn't empty. The front door was still open, and inside, the mirror in the hallway glimmered faintly, like it was catching light that shouldn't exist. He drove straight to the county archives, box of photographs on the seat beside him. When he arrived, the clerk who'd spoken with him earlier was waiting by the counter. Her face looked tense, like she'd been expecting him. "You went there, didn't you?" she said. He nodded. "You shouldn't have. That house was sealed for a reason." She took one photograph from the box, the one with the family standing outside. Her eyes flicked to the girl in the window. "You see her too?" she whispered. "Most people can't." Her name, she said, was Lydia. Elias Monroe's adopted daughter. Or that's what the papers had said, but the truth was darker. Lydia had been taken from a state asylum after an outbreak in 1955. She was only 9. Elias had signed the papers himself, calling it an act of charity, but a nurse's report from that same year described Lydia as mute, unresponsive, prone to prolonged staring, and resistant to her own reflection. After her adoption, all official documentation about her stopped. No school records, no photographs outside that house. Just silence, until the disappearance. The clerk leaned in and said quietly, "Elias built that house for her. Every wall, every room, designed to keep her inside." David felt his stomach twist. "Keep her inside?" he asked. She nodded slowly. He believed she was dangerous, said her presence made the others sick. He boarded the windows. Then one night, the family vanished. Elias told the sheriff they'd gone to visit relatives in Missouri. 2 weeks later, he was found dead in the cellar, hanging from the rafters. The official report called it suicide, but the photos taken that day told another story. Elias's face frozen mid-scream, and written on the floor beneath him in a child's handwriting were 3 words, the same 3 that now haunted David's every breath. Remember their names. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you keep searching, or would you burn the house and never look back? Because David didn't stop. He couldn't. Obsession is a quiet disease. It doesn't roar or scream. It whispers, and David was already listening. For weeks, he didn't go back to work. He stopped answering calls. The photographs never left his desk. He started mapping out the timeline, the dates on the jars, the years on the back of the photos, the building records, and that's when he saw it. Every event aligned with one thing, Lydia's birthdays. Each year after her arrival, the house seemed to shift. The dates on the jars matched each passing season, and the number of jars increased. 11 jars the first year, 12 the next, each one holding a small personal item from a family member, like offerings or tributes. David began to think the house itself had become some kind of shrine. But to what? Or to whom? Late one night, his computer flickered. He swore he hadn't touched it. The photo of the house appeared on his screen, the one showing Lydia behind the glass. Only this time, she was closer. Her face pressed against the window, eyes black, mouth open. He yanked the plug from the wall, but the image didn't disappear. The monitor stayed on, glowing faintly, humming like something alive. And then, a sound from outside. He stepped to the window. Across the street, parked beneath the same oak tree from the photograph, sat his car, but inside it, through the windshield, he could see movement, someone sitting in the driver's seat, perfectly still. When he opened his front door, the night was silent, the air thick and damp, like the breath of something waiting. He crossed the street, slow, deliberate, until he stood beside the car. It was empty, but on the seat, where the box of photographs had been, there was only one picture now. The rest, gone. He picked it up. His heart froze. It was a new photograph, one he'd never seen before. It showed the front of his own apartment building, his own win. Dow, his own face reflected in the glass, and behind him, the girl, Lydia, smiling. He dropped the photo, backing away, but his phone buzzed in his pocket. A new message. No number. Just words. "You said you'd remember." David looked up at his apartment. The light in his window flickered twice, and went out. The silence that followed felt familiar, heavy, like the air inside the house on Willow Creek. The next morning, David's neighbors called the police. They said his lights had been flickering all night, that they'd heard footsteps pacing above their ceiling until dawn. When the officers arrived, his front door was locked from the inside. His car still sat across the street, keys in the ignition. They found him sitting at his desk, not dead, not exactly, breathing shallow, eyes wide open, fixed on the wall ahead. In front of him lay a single photograph, freshly developed, edges still damp. It showed him seated at that very desk, looking straight into the camera. But he hadn't taken it. Behind him in the photo, faint but visible, stood the outline of a little girl in a white dress, her head tilted, her hands resting gently on his shoulders. They took him to the hospital that afternoon. The doctors called it catatonia, brought on by extreme psychological distress. He never spoke again, but nurses said that sometimes late at night he would mouth something silently, again and again, until they sedated him. 3 words. Remember their names. After that, the county boarded up the Willow Creek house for good. But strange things kept happening. Trespassers reported hearing a child's laughter in the cellar. Others said their cameras malfunctioned near the property line. One man claimed that when he developed his photos, a face appeared in every one, pale, small, watching through the corners of the frame. And the most disturbing detail of all, the message on the wall inside the house had changed again. Investigators swore they hadn't written it, yet there it was, scrawled in fresh black ink over the faded words. One house, one lie, too many secrets. And now, one more. After David's case was closed, the photographs were entered into evidence, all except one. The picture of his apartment, the one that shouldn't have existed, vanished from police custody. No record, no trace. But every few years, someone online claims to find it again, uploaded to forgotten forums, anonymous threads, or buried in archives that no longer exist. And in every version, the photo seems slightly different. The girl closer, the reflection clearer, the writing on the bottom margin more distinct each time. Today, it reads something new, something final. You looked too long. So if you ever come across an old photograph of a house with its windows blacked out, don't try to fix the exposure. Don't zoom in. Don't look for who's standing behind the glass, because she remembers who does, and she never forgets their names.